The desert sun scorched Fort Bragg's training field, turning the gravel paths into a white-hot glare. Lieutenant Dana Cole's uniform was plastered to her skin with sweat and dust, her once pristine Navy SEAL training gear now streaked with mud and grime. She lay on the ground, chest heaving, staring up at the cloudless sky, as if the heavens might offer her some mercy. Her ribs throbbed like drums. Each breath was a reminder that she had taken a hard hit minutes ago. She hadn't expected this. Not here, not in the land of her own people at home, on what should have been just another day of training. It had started innocently enough, or at least she had thought it had. Being the only woman in a platoon of 30 men came with its own invisible set of rules, rules that no one had bothered to explain. At first, she had tried to prove herself, lifting heavier weights, finishing sprints faster, staying longer in cold water tanks than anyone else. She had endured grueling drills in the sweltering sun, climbed walls that scraped her skin raw, and learned to fire every weapon in the arsenal until her hands bled. She had survived combat overseas, medevacs, firefights, and missions no one back home could even imagine. Yet somehow, her own peers thought her presence was a joke. The shove that knocked her to the ground had come from Private Hayes, one of the younger men who had never missed a chance to humiliate her. He had smirked as he pushed her sideways, sending her crashing into the dirt with a sickening thud. The others laughed, hooting and hollering like she was part of some cruel circus act. Dana gritted her teeth, tasting coppery blood in her mouth, and tried to rise. The gravel scraped her palms raw, her knees protested, but she forced herself up anyway. Her mind raced. You've survived worse than this. You've survived ambushes, IEDs, firefights. You're not done. You won't quit. But the reality of being surrounded by colleagues who didn't just doubt her but actively sought to undermine her gnawed at her from the inside. She clenched her fists and stared at Hayes. For a second, he thought he'd won. For a brief, shining moment, Dana imagined the fantasy of picking him up by his collar, letting him feel just a fraction of the pain he'd caused her, but she shook her head. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. She had to stay professional. She had to survive. The lieutenant in her office had been dismissive, the captain lukewarm in his support. "Tensions are high," Captain Reeves had said earlier that week. "Don't escalate, keep your head down." Dana's blood had boiled at the remark. She wanted to shout, "I'm not the problem here. You are ignoring it," but she had swallowed her pride, smiled, and nodded. The last thing she needed was a reprimand or a mark against her record. In this world, appearances mattered as much as skills, and sometimes more. Dana's boots crunched over the gravel as she slowly stood, trying to regain her composure. Her ribs ached sharply and her lungs burned with each deep breath. Sweat trickled into her eyes, stinging, but she refused to wipe it away. If she showed weakness, she would be devoured alive. The men around her, her so-called peers, knew how to sense vulnerability, and they would exploit it without hesitation. A few yards away, Hayes leaned lazily against the Humvee, watching her with that same cocky smirk that had haunted her for weeks. He wasn't alone. 2 others stood beside him, smirking quietly, whispering words Dana couldn't catch but didn't need to hear. The mocking was implicit, etched into every glance, every gesture. They were waiting for her to break. And for a split second, she felt it. The terrifying weight of isolation, the sharp sting of humiliation, and the creeping doubt that maybe she didn't belong here after all. Her thoughts flicked to her time overseas, Afghanistan, the Middle East, all the places where life had been cheap and fear had been constant. There, she had faced enemies who wanted her dead. There, she had found her strength in the chaos of battle. And here, in what should have been a safe environment, it seemed that the real enemy was closer than she ever imagined. The enemy wasn't the terrain, the heat, or the exercises. The enemy was the people around her. Dana pressed her hand into the dirt, feeling the gritty particles press into her skin, mixing with the blood on her knuckles. She blinked rapidly to clear her vision and took a shaky breath. She had a choice: stay down, let the humiliation sink into her bones, and let Hayes and his cronies feel the thrill of victory, or rise and show them that they had underestimated her. Every lesson she had ever learned screamed at her to get up, to fight, to survive. And yet the thought of standing there, alone against the sea of judgmental stares, made her stomach twist. She forced herself upright, pain lancing through her side with every motion. The humiliation lingered, a heavy cloak she couldn't shake off. She straightened her shoulders, pulled her chin up, and met Hayes's eyes. His smirk faltered slightly, replaced by a hint of uncertainty. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a crack in their facade, a tiny glimmer of the battle she could still win. Dana's thoughts drifted briefly to her family, to the moments when she had doubted herself, wondering if all the sacrifices had been worth it. She remembered her mother's voice, steady and unyielding, telling her to never let anyone decide her worth. You are more than their opinion. You are more than their games. You are stronger than they can imagine. The memory fueled something inside her, a spark that refused to be extinguished. And in that spark she found clarity. This was bigger than one shove, one insult, or one day of humiliation. This was a test of her resilience, of her capacity to endure in a world that too often sought to crush those who dared to challenge it. Dana clenched her fists, inhaled deeply, and let the rage simmer into determination. She would not be a victim, not here, not now, not ever. But just as she straightened, bracing herself for the long day ahead, a shadow moved at the edge of her vision, a figure watching silently from the perimeter of the field. Dana's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't see the face clearly, but there was a weight to the presence that was different from Hayes and his cronies. It was calm, controlled, but there was something intense lurking beneath the surface. Her pulse quickened, a mix of curiosity and unease curling in her stomach. Dana didn't know it yet, but this observer would change everything. This wasn't just another day of humiliation, another attempt to knock her down. Something was about to shift, something that would challenge not just her body but the very way she saw herself. And for the first time that morning, a hint of anticipation threaded through the exhaustion and pain. She inhaled one final, shuddering breath, gripping the edge of her uniform as if holding onto her dignity itself. The dirt beneath her fingernails was a reminder of where she had fallen, but also of where she could rise. The glint of steel in the distance caught her eye, though she wasn't sure what it was, a tool, a weapon, or simply a part of the training equipment. But it seemed symbolic in that moment, a small signal that help, or perhaps reckoning, was near. Dana Cole took a step forward, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. The laughter of her peers faded slightly in the background as the presence at the edge of the field remained, silent and immovable. Something told her that the worst was not over, and that the moment she thought she had been defeated, a new force was waiting to intervene. And in that suspended moment, Dana knew one truth with piercing clarity. They weren't going to stop. And neither would she. The clang of metal doors echoed through the narrow hallway as Dana walked toward Captain Reeves's office, each step dragging with exhaustion and tension. Her ribs still throbbed from the shove earlier that morning, and every muscle ached from the previous day's grueling drills, yet her mind was restless, replaying the humiliation on the training field. She had survived firefights, explosions, and missions that had tested her body and her mind in ways most people couldn't imagine. And yet, here she was, facing a different kind of enemy, one that thrived on bureaucracy and cruelty. The captain's office smelled of stale coffee and old paperwork. Reeves sat behind his desk, fingers drumming lightly on the wood, avoiding eye contact as she entered. "Lieutenant Cole," he muttered, his tone flat. "Tensions are high. Don't escalate anything." Dana's jaw tightened. She wanted to snap back, to tell him that the escalation was already here, that the harassment had been escalating for weeks and that today had crossed a line. But she swallowed, standing rigid in front of him. "Yes, sir," she said, voice steady though her blood boiled beneath the surface. He finally looked up briefly, just enough to glance at her. "I know you've had a rough day," he continued, almost dismissively. "I don't want to see you make things worse. Keep your head down." Dana clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. Every nerve in her body screamed that keeping her head down was the exact wrong thing to do. She wanted to scream at him. "Do you think this is about keeping my head down? It's about them trying to crush me." and you're letting it happen." Instead, she nodded and left, forcing her emotions into a cage where they couldn't spill over. But her anger didn't fade, it only grew. And as she walked back into the harsh sunlight, she saw them again, Hayes and his two allies leaning casually against the Humvee. Their smirks were sharper now, filled with confidence, as if Reeves' warning had been confirmation that no one was coming to stop them. Hayes stepped forward, hands in his pockets, pretending casual interest as Dana passed. "Rough day, Lieutenant," he sneered. His tone was light, but there was an edge to it that sent a jolt of fury through her chest. Dana didn't respond. She forced herself to walk past, heels crunching on the gravel, ignoring the taunting whispers that trailed behind her. But each step was heavy with the awareness that she was still under attack, still being watched, and still outnumbered. By the time she reached the gym, the heat of the day had intensified. Sweat already soaked her uniform, sticking to her skin like a second layer. She focused on the training equipment, ropes, pull-up bars, and weighted sleds. But her mind kept returning to the field, to the shove, to the laughter, to the gnawing realization that this wasn't just one isolated incident. It was systemic. Dana's eyes scanned the room and landed on a shadow at the far edge of the gym. She froze for a heartbeat. The figure wasn't moving, just standing silently and observing. Something about the presence was unsettling, calm, controlled, but powerful. Her instincts, honed from years in combat zones, screamed at her that this person wasn't just a passerby. But before she could focus further, the moment passed. The figure blended back into the shadows, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. Dana forced herself to breathe steadily, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. She had a long day ahead, obstacle courses, weapons drills, endurance tests, and perhaps more harassment if Hayes decided to escalate again. She tightened her fists and tried to channel her frustration into energy, pushing herself harder than anyone else could. But the moment she reached for the pull-up bar, a voice cut through the gym. "Cole." She turned sharply. Private Hayes had crossed the room, walking toward her with a grin that screamed malice. "You sure you can handle all this? Don't want to collapse halfway through." Dana's muscles tensed, her body screaming with fatigue, yet her mind sharpened. She refused to show fear. "I'll manage," she said coolly, her voice steady, controlled. Hayes leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Word is, you're thinking about complaining about me. Don't bother. Nobody's going to take your side." Dana froze for a fraction of a second. She knew complaints often fell on deaf ears, but hearing it directly from him, with the confidence that no one would intervene, sent a chill through her spine. Her mind raced. She could either back down, pretend nothing had happened, and hope it stopped, or she could take control of the narrative, find a way to fight back. Before she could respond, a familiar, deep voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Both Dana and Hayes turned toward the doorway. The shadow from earlier stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, with an intensity in his eyes that made even Hayes hesitate. It was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hale, a retired Navy SEAL whose reputation preceded him. Combat veteran, decorated hero, and someone whose presence alone could silence a room. Hale's eyes locked on Hayes and the smirk faded immediately. "Touch her again," Hale said, his voice low but deadly calm, "and I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." Hayes' bravado faltered. He muttered an excuse, stepping back slightly, while Dana felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. Who was this man, and why was he here now at this exact moment? She felt the stirrings of hope, tempered by caution. She had learned not to rely on luck. Help was only meaningful if it came from someone she could trust completely. Hale's gaze shifted to Dana, assessing her silently for a heartbeat before speaking. "You okay?" His tone wasn't condescending. It carried respect, concern, and something else, something she couldn't quite place. Dana nodded, words catching in her throat. "Yes, sir, thank you." Hale studied her for a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the gym's far exit, eyes scanning the room as if ensuring no one else dared interfere. Dana watched him go, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle on her shoulders. He had intervened, yes, but the tension was far from over. The system was still stacked against her. The recruits, the administration, even the subtle biases woven into every interaction, these were challenges she would have to face alone. Her gaze returned to Hayes, who now lingered awkwardly by the wall. Dana's mind was already forming strategies, contingency plans. She would not allow herself to be intimidated. Not today. Not ever. Yet despite her resolve, a shadow of doubt lingered. The stakes were higher now. Someone had entered her battlefield, but the enemy was far from defeated. She could feel the tension coiling like a spring within her chest, a mixture of fear, anger, and determination. Something told her that Hayes and the others wouldn't stop at shoves and insults. They would escalate, finding ways to break her. And while Hale had intervened this time, Dana knew she couldn't rely on him to be there every time the harassment struck. As the gym clock ticked relentlessly forward, Dana felt a moment of stillness, an almost imperceptible pause in the chaos of the day. It was a chance to breathe, to recalibrate, to prepare. But the pause was fragile. She could sense the storm building just beyond the horizon, ready to crash down with full force. And in that moment, a quiet determination settled over her like armor. They had underestimated her once. They would not get the chance again. Dana Cole squared her shoulders, inhaled deeply, and looked out toward the training field. The gravel path shimmered in the midday sun, and in the distance, Hayes and his allies lingered, watching, waiting. She could feel the eyes of every soldier in the unit, every evaluation officer, every hidden observer, even the shadow of Hale who had left so quickly. One thing was certain, the day was far from over. And Dana knew, with an almost eerie certainty, that the real battle was only beginning. Somewhere out there, the forces arrayed against her were preparing for their next move, and she would have to be ready. The night air at Fort Bragg carried a sharp chill, biting through Dana Cole's uniform as she walked alone toward the gym. Most of the base had gone quiet, the only sounds the occasional hum of distant vehicles or the rustle of leaves in the wind. But Dana knew better than to trust the calm. Silence was often the precursor to chaos. Her ribs throbbed painfully, a reminder of the shove she had taken earlier that day, and her muscles ached with fatigue. Every step was deliberate, measured, each footfall echoing off the nearby barracks walls like a warning. Halfway to the gym, Dana sensed movement. Shadows shifted along the perimeter and the faintest whisper reached her ears. She froze. Her instincts, honed from years in war zones, screamed at her that something was wrong. The hairs along the back of her neck prickled. She tightened her grip on the strap of her duffel bag, feeling a pulse of fear mixed with the familiar surge of adrenaline. Then suddenly, a heavy shove sent her sprawling onto the concrete. Pain exploded across her side and cheek as she hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Dirt and gravel scraped against her skin, and for a terrifying moment she felt the disorientation of being vulnerable, powerless, exposed. Hayes crouched in front of her, smirking down at her with cruel satisfaction. "You really should quit, Lieutenant," he whispered, his tone icy. "Nobody wants you here. Not your peers, not the officers, nobody." Dana gasped for air, her mind racing despite the sting in her ribs and the sharp pain in her cheek. Every instinct in her body screamed to fight, but she also knew that a misstep could escalate this beyond control. Her eyes locked onto Hayes, and something fierce ignited within her, a spark she hadn't felt in weeks. Rage, humiliation, and determination fused into a single, blinding clarity. She would not be beaten here, not by him, not by anyone. Before Dana could rise, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. A figure stepped forward, the presence commanding and immediate. Marcus Hale. Even in the dim light, Dana recognized him instantly. The retired Navy SEAL, legendary for combat operations that most soldiers only read about in briefings and stories. Hale's eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept over the scene like a predator assessing threats. His hand rested casually on his belt, but the weight behind his gaze carried a subtle threat. Anyone foolish enough to continue this confrontation would face consequences far beyond their understanding. "Step back," Hale said, his voice low but laced with lethal calm. "Now." Hayes hesitated, uncertainty creeping into his features for the first time that day. The smirk faltered. "Oh, we were just—" "Silence," Hale interrupted, stepping closer. His presence seemed to shift the air itself. Dana felt a rush of relief but also a flicker of unease. She had survived explosions, firefights, ambushes, and IEDs, yet the fear she felt now was different. This was psychological, a battle of intimidation, power, and manipulation within a place she had thought safe. Hale's gaze flicked to Dana. "You okay?" His tone was neutral, almost detached, yet carried enough weight that Dana felt it grounding her, giving her a tether to reality amid the chaos. Dana nodded slowly, gripping her side, her voice strained. "Yes, sir, thank you." "Good," Hale said, his eyes never leaving Hayes. "I won't ask again. Touch her or anyone else under my watch and you'll regret it." Hayes muttered a hasty excuse and retreated into the darkness. Dana forced herself to rise, her ribs screaming in protest, and straightened her shoulders as she dusted off dirt and gravel. Her movements were slow, careful, each one deliberate. But her heart pounded fiercely, not just from the pain, but from the awareness that she had narrowly avoided a far worse confrontation. Hale stayed by her side for a moment, scanning the surroundings. The base was quiet, but the tension was palpable. "They think they can push you because they see weakness," Hale said quietly, almost to himself. "Don't let them. They're dangerous, not just physically, but in how they manipulate the system." Dana swallowed hard, taking in his words. It was true. She had seen it. The subtle dismissals from officers, the snide comments from peers, the veiled threats that went unpunished. The system seemed designed to protect mediocrity and crush anyone who dared challenge it. Her stomach twisted with anger, frustration, and a growing determination. Hale's gaze softened slightly as he looked at her. "You're not alone," he said, "but you need to be smart, plan your moves carefully, don't let them see you sweat." Dana nodded again, though her mind was racing. She understood what he was saying: survive, adapt, fight back strategically. But the thought of planning while being constantly under siege was exhausting. She had survived war zones, yes, but the psychological warfare she faced now was relentless. She would need to learn new tactics, fight smarter, and anticipate attacks that were personal, malicious, and ongoing. "Walk with me," Hale said suddenly, motioning toward the gym. Dana followed, careful to mask her pain and fatigue. Every step echoed in the quiet night, a reminder of how exposed they were. Yet walking beside Hale, she felt a strange sense of security, a shield against the storm that was closing in. When they reached the gym, Hale's eyes swept over the training equipment. "Tomorrow, we start early. I'll push you harder than anyone here. I want you to be undeniable so no one dares touch you again." Dana's pulse quickened. She had trained under grueling conditions before, but Hale's presence added a new dimension, a challenge she couldn't ignore. She understood that his methods would be intense, perhaps punishing, but effective. He had fought wars, survived chaos, and returned alive. His mentorship could be the difference between being crushed here or rising above it. But for now, she allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, to process the events of the day. She leaned against the wall, letting the sweat cool on her skin, tasting the tang of blood from her cheek, the grit of dirt under her fingernails. Her thoughts drifted to Hayes and the others, how far they would go next, what new torment they would attempt. She knew the base could be cruel, but something deep within her stirred. "I will not be broken here. Not by them, not by anyone." Suddenly, a distant clatter echoed from the edge of the base, a noise too deliberate to be random. Dana's head snapped toward the sound, muscles tensing. Hale noticed it too, his eyes narrowing. "Stay alert," he said quietly. "They might think the night hides them, but shadows reveal a lot more than people expect." Dana's mind whirled. The thought that Hayes and his allies might escalate in secret, planning something more dangerous, made her stomach tighten with both fear and anticipation. She had faced ambushes in deserts, forests, and war zones, but never had she encountered an enemy that lurked in plain sight, using the system itself as a weapon. She exhaled slowly, trying to center herself. Pain, fatigue, humiliation, it all coiled together inside her like a storm ready to erupt. And in that moment she realized something crucial. She wasn't just defending herself physically anymore. She was fighting for her place, her dignity, her career, and her sanity. Every moment, every choice would matter. And somewhere in the shadows, the people who had shoved her, mocked her, and tried to destroy her believed they had won. But they were wrong. Dana Cole had survived war zones, explosions, and the worst humanity could throw at her. They had underestimated her resilience, and that would be their greatest mistake. The night was far from over. The next move belonged to them, but Dana had already begun planning her counterstrike. The first light of dawn had barely touched the horizon when Dana Cole stepped onto the abandoned obstacle course at the edge of Fort Bragg. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and gravel, but her body still burned from yesterday's confrontation. She had barely slept, every hour haunted by the shove, Hayes' smirk, and the memory of the laughter that had echoed across the field. Now, standing alone among ropes, walls, and mud pits, she wondered what awaited her next. A shadow detached itself from the tree line. Dana's eyes narrowed as a figure approached, every movement deliberate, calm, yet impossible to ignore. Marcus Hale, retired Navy SEAL, combat legend, and man whose reputation had preceded him wherever she went, walked toward her with a quiet authority. The weight of his presence seemed to settle over the obstacle course like a shield, demanding attention and respect. "Morning, Lieutenant," Hale said, voice low and steady, carrying the faintest edge of authority. "I hear you've had a rough couple of days." Dana's chest tightened. "Yes, sir," she admitted, her tone restrained. "It's been challenging." Hale's eyes scanned her, assessing every detail. The fatigue in her stance, the tension in her muscles, the fire that still burned behind her eyes. "Challenging is one thing," he said, "but you need to be undeniable if you want to survive here. Not just survive physically, but command respect mentally and strategically. Understand?" Dana nodded, swallowing against the lump in her throat. She had trained under some of the toughest instructors the Navy could produce, faced life-and-death combat situations, and endured missions designed to break the human spirit. Yet something about Hale's calm, precise presence made the challenge ahead feel even more intense. "Good," Hale continued. "We start with fundamentals. You'll run drills, push yourself harder than anyone else here, and I won't let you fall, literally or figuratively, but it will hurt. You will want to quit, and you won't. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Can you commit to that?" Dana straightened her shoulders, the morning chill doing little to cool the fire in her veins. "Yes, sir," she said firmly. Hale's gaze lingered on her, measuring, calculating. "Then let's begin." The first exercise was simple in theory but brutal in execution. Mud-caked walls, ropes slick with morning dew, weighted sprints, and timed climbs. Hale observed silently as Dana began, her muscles screaming, her lungs burning, her body protesting with every motion. She fell once, twice, each time forcing herself back to her feet. Hale's voice, calm but cutting, punctuated each repetition. Again, not fast enough, not strong enough, not ready. By the third hour, sweat stung her eyes, her uniform was drenched, and the gravel beneath her hands had cut her palms raw. Her ribs throbbed sharply from the previous shoves, and she fought the urge to collapse. But Hale never let her falter completely. When her knees buckled, he was there, steadying her, offering a brief word of guidance before pushing her back into motion. "Don't quit," he said simply. "Pain is temporary, weakness is a choice." Dana repeated the words silently, letting them anchor her. She thought of Hayes, of the humiliation of the system that had ignored her pleas. She thought of the shoves, the whispered insults, the laughter that had followed her all morning. Pain and anger coiled together inside her, transforming into determination. She would not be broken. She would rise. By midday, Hale changed the drill. Now she was being pushed through a tactical obstacle course designed to test balance, agility, and mental acuity under physical stress. Weighted sleds dragged behind her as she sprinted across uneven gravel. Rope climbs tested her upper body, while walls loomed like silent adversaries daring her to fail. Hale's eyes never left her, assessing her every move. "You can do more," he barked, his voice a cutting knife through the haze of exertion. "Push past the fear, push past the fatigue, push past them." Dana's breath came in ragged gasps. Her arms trembled with exhaustion. Mud and sweat plastered her hair to her face. Her lungs burned, threatening to collapse under the weight of her determination. And yet, every time she faltered, Hale was there, steadying, instructing, pushing, demanding more. Hours blurred into each other, the obstacle course becoming a crucible, burning away the doubt and weakness that had clung to her for weeks. By the time the sun hung high overhead, her body was exhausted beyond measure, but her mind had sharpened, her focus honed to a single point. She could feel the difference. The muscles that had burned yesterday now carried strength, her reflexes were quicker, her awareness heightened. Finally, Hale stepped back, observing her from a few feet away. Dana fell to her knees, heaving, every fiber of her being screaming with exhaustion. She looked up at him, sweat and dirt streaking her face, chest rising and falling rapidly. "You're ready," Hale said quietly. Dana blinked, disbelief and relief mingling in her gaze. "Not just ready to survive, they won't be able to touch you without facing consequences. Not today, not ever." Dana felt a mix of pride and trepidation. She understood that this was only the beginning. Hayes and the other recruits were still out there, waiting, planning, watching. The system that had failed her was still in place. And yet, for the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope, a glimmer of confidence that she could not just endure but rise above. But Hale wasn't done. "Tomorrow we start earlier," he said, voice low and firm. "You'll run even harder drills, face heavier weights, and perform exercises designed to break you. And each time you think you can't go further, you will. Understood?" Dana nodded, understanding fully. This was not just training, it was a transformation. She had faced challenges before, but this was different. Hale was preparing her not just to survive, but to dominate in a place that had underestimated her, to become unstoppable against those who sought to crush her. Her mind flickered briefly to Hayes, to the shove, to the laughter, to the cold indifference of the officers who had dismissed her complaints. A fire burned inside her, a mixture of rage, humiliation, and determination. She would not let them win. She would not be a victim. She would fight back, stronger than ever. And then Hale's gaze softened slightly. "I won't always be here," he said quietly. "You need to learn to rely on yourself, trust your instincts, push beyond what you think is possible, and never let anyone make you doubt your worth." Dana felt the weight of his words sink in. It wasn't just about physical strength. It was about resilience, strategy, and psychological fortitude. She had learned to survive in war zones, but this was a new battlefield, one where the enemy was cunning, relentless, and hidden in plain sight. The day ended with Dana standing atop the tallest wall of the obstacle course, sweat and mud streaking her face, her muscles trembling with fatigue. She looked out across the base, the sun casting long shadows over the gravel paths, the distant barracks, and the places where Hayes and his allies lurked. Somewhere out there, they were plotting their next move, unaware that Dana Cole was no longer the same woman they had tried to humiliate. Hale's words echoed in her mind. "Push beyond what you think is possible. Never let anyone make you doubt your worth." For the first time, Dana felt a sense of control, a clarity that had been missing. The fight was far from over, but she was no longer alone and she was no longer defenseless. Hayes and the others had underestimated her. The system had tried to crush her. And now, with Hale's guidance, she was learning how to fight back, not just survive, but rise. She took a deep breath, looking toward the horizon. The day ahead would be brutal, but she was ready. Pain, fear, humiliation, they were no longer weapons against her. They were fuel. and somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet promise formed. They had kicked her into the dirt, but she would rise, and when she did, they would regret ever underestimating her. The sun had barely broken over the horizon, painting the base in harsh gold and long shadows, when Dana Cole felt the first sting of realization. This was not going to be easy. Not easy by any measure. Hale met her at the edge of the obstacle course, his figure tall and commanding against the pale morning light. The air carried the faint smell of pine and dust, but there was a tension that seemed to cling to every blade of grass and gravel stone. Dana's muscles were still sore from the previous day, and the bruises along her ribs throbbed painfully. But she clenched her fists and straightened her shoulders. She wouldn't let exhaustion or pain break her. "Morning, Lieutenant," Hale said, voice calm but carrying weight authority. "Today we go deeper, harder. You're going to push further than you thought possible. If you think this is a game, you'll fail. If you think you can quit, you'll regret it." Dana met his gaze, feeling the burn of both fear and anticipation. "Yes, sir," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Hale's eyes swept the course. Mud-streaked ropes hung like serpents ready to strike, weighted sleds lay in wait, and walls loomed like silent adversaries daring anyone to climb them. Today was not just about endurance, it was about transformation. He motioned for her to start. The first drill was brutal, weighted sprints across uneven terrain, her legs carrying the stubborn weight of fatigue, each stride a battle against the pain that threatened to overwhelm her. Hale's voice followed her every step. "Faster, push past the doubt. You are stronger than you think." Dana's lungs burned, her arms trembled, but she forced herself to keep moving. Sweat dripped into her eyes, mixing with dirt and streaking her face. Her ribs throbbed sharply, and each breath was shallow and ragged. Yet she ran, each step a defiance, a silent declaration that she would not be broken. After the sprint came the ropes. They were slick with morning dew, their fibers biting into her palms as she climbed, her arms screaming in protest. She faltered mid-ascent, her strength faltering, and the world seemed to tilt for a brief, terrifying second. Again, Hale's voice cut through the haze, precise and unyielding. Dana shook her head, gasping, "I can't." "Yes, you can," Hale interrupted sharply. "Pain is temporary, weakness is a choice. Push, now." Something inside her ignited, a spark that had been buried under weeks of humiliation, exhaustion, and doubt. She gritted her teeth and climbed, each movement deliberate, each pull a fight against both gravity and her own fear. When she reached the top, Hale extended a hand, steadying her, but his eyes were firm, challenging. "Good. Now down and back up. You're not done." She wanted to collapse, to scream, to fall into the forgiving dirt below. But she didn't. She jumped down, hit the ground, and started again, muscles shaking, lungs screaming. And all the while, the memory of Hayes' smirk and the shove from earlier this week fueled her, transforming anger into determination. Hours passed in a blur of mud, sweat, weighted sleds, and walls. Hale pushed her harder than she had ever been pushed before. She fell, she stumbled, she gasped, she cursed, but he never let her stop. Every time her body wavered, he was there, steadying her, correcting her form, driving her forward. "Not enough," he barked after one particularly grueling round. "You're capable of more. I don't want you tired. I want you strong. I want you undeniable. You need to become someone they can't ignore, someone they can't touch without consequence." Dana's mind flickered with images of Hayes and his cronies, of the sneers and whispered threats that had haunted her every day since arrival. She imagined them trying to push her down again, their confidence faltering in the face of someone they could not intimidate. The thought fueled her further, her anger and humiliation transformed into a weapon. By midday she was drenched, bruised, and trembling, but something fundamental had shifted. Her reflexes were sharper, her focus more precise, and every movement carried the weight of experience, skill, and newfound confidence. Hale observed silently, noting every improvement, every hesitation, every moment she overcame the pain. Your body is capable, he said finally, his voice softer, almost contemplative. Your mind is where you need the work. Anticipate, plan, think 3 moves ahead. You can survive brute force, but strategy will make you untouchable. Dana nodded, understanding the depth of his lesson. This wasn't just about physical training. It was about building a mindset, crafting resilience, and reclaiming control over an environment designed to belittle and humiliate her. The afternoon brought a new set of drills, balancing across narrow beams, scaling walls under time pressure, and handling simulated ambushes. Each exercise tested not only her body but her mental fortitude. Hale's voice cut through every moment, correcting, instructing, challenging. Not enough, he barked after she stumbled on a balance beam. Eyes up, mind focused. You need to anticipate every threat, every variable. If you fall, you die. Figuratively here, literally out there. Understand? Yes, sir, Dana replied, voice fierce, even as sweat and mud streaked her face. Every drill pushed her closer to exhaustion, closer to breaking, but Hale's presence grounded her. He did not coddle, he did not cheer, he did not allow weakness to flourish. He demanded excellence, precision, and unwavering commitment. And through his guidance, Dana began to see a path forward. She could reclaim control, fight back, and survive, not just against Hayes, but against the entire system that had underestimated her. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the final drill commenced. Dana had to carry a weighted sled across the field, climb a rope, and sprint to the far wall. Her arms shook violently, her legs threatened to collapse, and her ribs screamed with pain, but she pushed on. Every ounce of strength, every bit of determination, carried her forward. When she finally reached the top, Hale stood below, watching, his expression unreadable. Dana's chest heaved, her body trembling, but a sense of triumph coursed through her veins. She had survived again. She had endured, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the seed of empowerment taking root. Hale extended a hand to help her down. "You've come a long way," he said quietly, tone carrying approval. "But this is just the beginning. Tomorrow will be harder. They'll push back. The system will push back. But you're learning to fight on your terms. Remember this feeling. Remember that you're capable of more than they can imagine." Dana took a deep, shuddering breath, gripping his hand, and nodded. Her mind flashed briefly to Hayes, to the shoves, to the whispers, and to the laughter. But the fear and frustration that had once held her captive had shifted. Now there was focus, clarity, and strategy. She was no longer just reacting. She was preparing to take control. And somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet, unwavering determination settled. The training had broken her limits and built her back stronger. Hayes and his cronies had underestimated her, but they would not make that mistake again. They had kicked her into the dirt. But she was getting back up. And next time, she would fight back smarter, faster, and stronger than anyone could expect. The base was quiet, deceptively so, as Dana Cole moved along the edge of the training field in the early morning haze. The previous days of grueling SEAL-style training with Marcus Hale had honed her body and sharpened her mind, but she knew better than to assume the threat was gone. Hayes and his cronies had been watching, waiting for an opportunity to humiliate her again, to prove that she didn't belong. Her senses were alert, every muscle coiled and ready. She could hear the faint rustle of gravel beneath boots she hadn't seen, the soft whisper of voices carried by the wind. Each shadow along the barracks, each flicker of movement in the distance, demanded attention. The training had taught her to anticipate, to read intent, to react before the threat fully revealed itself. And the threat was here. Hayes stepped out from behind a stack of crates, flanked by 2 allies. This time their approach was deliberate, coordinated. The arrogance on their faces spoke volumes. They thought they had her cornered, thought the morning quiet gave them an advantage. But Dana had been preparing for this moment. As Hayes lunged forward, aiming to shove her off balance, Dana twisted, using her own momentum to redirect him. A grunt of surprise escaped his lips as he stumbled past her. Before he could recover, she spun, her training kicking in, and delivered a precise, controlled strike to his shoulder, enough to stagger him without causing serious harm, but enough to assert dominance. Hale's voice cut through the air like a rifle shot. Focus. Neutralize the threat without losing control. Don't give them the upper hand. Dana's eyes flicked to him briefly, then back to Hayes and his cronies. Every movement mattered now, every step measured. She used the environment to her advantage: gravel underfoot, crates for cover, shadows to conceal her approach. She had learned more than brute strength in the past week. She had learned strategy, precision, and anticipation. The scuffle escalated. Hayes swung, trying to catch her off guard, but Dana blocked, redirected, and countered with movements that were fluid, precise, almost instinctual. Her body, once bruised and faltering, now moved with the confidence of someone who had trained to survive in the harshest conditions imaginable. Her heart raced, adrenaline surging through her veins, but her mind remained clear. Each move was calculated. Each strike served a purpose. She could see the hesitation creeping into Hayes' expression, the smirk replaced by panic, the confidence crumbling in real time. The others tried to flank her, but Dana anticipated their movements. A swift pivot, a low sweep, and one of them hit the ground with a grunt, scrambling to regain footing. Another charged, but Dana sidestepped, using leverage to send him stumbling into a stack of crates. Dust and debris filled the air, stinging her eyes, but she didn't falter. Hale's presence remained in the background, a steadying force. His eyes were sharp, constantly scanning, offering silent guidance. He didn't intervene directly. This was her fight. She had been training for this moment, and now it was time to apply everything she had learned. As the skirmish continued, Dana felt a shift within herself. The fear, frustration, and humiliation that had haunted her for weeks had transformed into focus, control, and power. She was no longer reacting. She was dictating the flow, turning what had once been a disadvantage into a series of tactical advantages. Hayes and his allies were growing desperate, their coordination breaking down under the precision of Dana's movements. One by one, they faltered, stumbling over the terrain, their confidence eroded by her strategic attacks. She could hear the labored breaths, the grunts of exertion, the unmistakable sounds of someone realizing they had underestimated their opponent. Finally, Hayes froze, eyes wide, realizing that the woman he had sought to humiliate was no longer the same. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of fear. Dana stepped forward, chest heaving, eyes locked on him. Every inch of her body radiated control and confidence. "You underestimated me," she said, voice steady, firm, carrying the weight of weeks of preparation and rage. "And that was your mistake." Hale stepped closer now, silent until this moment. His eyes met Dana's, and for a brief second there was acknowledgement, a nod that spoke volumes. She had done it. She had turned the humiliation, the fear, the constant attacks into strength. Hayes looked around, realizing the odds had shifted irrevocably. His cronies were either on the ground, stumbling, or frozen in indecision. The tide had turned, and Dana had orchestrated it with precision, skill, and the confidence that only comes from thorough preparation. The aftermath was surreal. Dana stood tall, sweat-soaked and exhausted, yet radiating control and command. Hayes and the others retreated silently. No words, no smirks, only the heavy understanding that the game had changed. They would not dare challenge her again without consequence. Hale finally spoke, voice calm but carrying authority. "You've taken the first step toward owning this environment," he said. "This isn't just about physical strength, it's about awareness, anticipation, and mental dominance. They tested you, and you responded. That's what separates those who survive from those who thrive." Dana exhaled, the tension in her body slowly releasing, but her mind remained sharp. She knew this victory was just one battle in a longer campaign. Hayes and others like him would not stop plotting. The system itself still harbored bias, indifference, and hostility. But for the first time she had proven to herself, to them, that she was not to be underestimated. She felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in weeks: pride. Not arrogance, not boastfulness, but quiet, hard-earned pride in her ability to take control, to stand tall in the face of deliberate opposition, to transform humiliation into power. Hale's eyes softened slightly. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow we push further, harder, but remember this moment. You've begun to reclaim your space, your authority, and your strength. Never forget it." Dana nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in. The ambush had been a trial, a test of everything she had endured, every skill she had honed, every ounce of resilience she possessed. And she had survived. More than survived, she had triumphed. As she walked away from the field, muscles trembling, heart racing, and skin streaked with sweat and grime, Dana knew this was only the beginning. The battle wasn't over. The system, Hayes, and the invisible barriers would continue to challenge her, test her, and push her limits. But now she had proof that she could rise above, fight back, and emerge stronger than ever. Somewhere on the edge of the base, Hayes nursed his bruised ego, staring after her retreating form. For the first time, he understood what it meant to face someone who would not be broken, who would not be intimidated, who had been underestimated at their peril. And Dana Cole, she walked with a quiet, unwavering determination. They had kicked her into the dirt. They had tested her limits, but now she was ready for whatever came next. They had underestimated her. They would never make that mistake again. And the next move would be hers. The base was alive with the quiet hum of activity, yet Dana Cole moved through it with a predator's focus. Every glance, every whisper, every shadow was catalogued in her mind. Hayes and his allies still lingered in the background, their confidence fractured but not gone, but Dana had transformed. She had been pushed, shoved, humiliated, and tested, and she had risen beyond it. Now she walked with the weight of experience, resilience, and newfound authority. Marcus Hale had been relentless in his mentorship. The SEAL-style training had stripped her to the bone and rebuilt her, forging a version of herself she hadn't recognized at first, a version that was stronger, sharper, faster, and unflinching. Today, she wasn't just a survivor. Today, she was a strategist, a tactician, and a force to be reckoned with. Her first stop was the training field, where whispers of the previous ambush still lingered in the minds of recruits. Dana's eyes scanned the area. Mud-streaked ropes swayed lightly in the breeze. Weighted sleds lay in wait. Obstacles that had seemed insurmountable yesterday were now familiar terrain, conquered by sheer determination and discipline. She moved through it all with precision, demonstrating not just strength but mastery, commanding attention without a word. Hayes appeared at the edge of the field, watching her with the faintest glimmer of fear beneath his usual arrogance. Dana's gaze met his, sharp and unyielding. There was no anger here. Anger had been replaced with calculated control. Her presence alone communicated a clear message. I am not the person you think I am. I am not weak. I am untouchable. The day was punctuated by drills that tested not only physical prowess but mental acuity. Dana moved through tactical obstacle courses, precision shooting exercises, and endurance sprints. But now she added strategy to the mix, anticipating Hayes' movements, predicting interference from other recruits, and navigating the challenges with a calm, almost predatory efficiency. Every motion, every decision was deliberate. At midday, Hale observed from a distance, nodding subtly. He had seen many soldiers rise and fall, but Dana's evolution was exceptional. Control is power, he reminded her quietly. Strength alone is never enough. Command your environment, command their perception, command yourself. Dana's mind replayed the lessons he had drilled into her. Anticipate threats, leverage terrain, maintain composure, and strike with precision. She applied them with instinctive ease. When a group of recruits tried to cut in front of her during a timed obstacle drill, she subtly adjusted her path, forcing them to fall behind without a word. Her actions were precise, silent, and unassailable. The message was clear: she would not be undermined. By afternoon, the whispers of her peers had shifted. Those who had once doubted her strength now watched with a mix of awe and wariness. Dana had not just survived, they had seen her rise. Her movements were fluid, her confidence radiated from her every action, and even the instructors took note of the transformation. Then came the moment she had been waiting for. Hayes approached, attempting the subtle intimidation that had once worked so well. But Dana met him head-on, her stance firm, her eyes unwavering. "You underestimated me," she said calmly, the memory of shoves, laughter, and humiliation burning in her chest. "You thought I would crumble. You were wrong." Hayes faltered, the color draining slightly from his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Dana held up a hand, a silent warning. Her presence alone conveyed the consequences of misjudging her. He stepped back, his confidence shattered, replaced by a flicker of fear. The day ended with a final test, an endurance challenge that combined mental puzzles with physical exertion. Dana moved through it methodically, using the lessons Hale had instilled in her. She anticipated each obstacle, adjusted her strategy in real time, and finished ahead of all others. The once derisive whispers were replaced with quiet respect, punctuated by hushed conversations about her skill, focus, and unbreakable will. Hale approached as she caught her breath, sweat and grime streaking her face. "Today you claimed your space," he said. "Not just physically, but mentally. You've shifted the power dynamic. They know now they cannot push you, and more importantly, you know it yourself. That is strength." Dana exhaled slowly, a quiet smile forming despite the exhaustion. She understood the stakes. Hayes and the other recruits could still plot, still attempt to undermine her. The system could still be cruel and biased. But she had proven, in concrete terms, that she was a force that could not be ignored. As she walked back toward the barracks, she reflected on the journey. The shoves, the whispers, the systemic indifference. They had all been part of the crucible that forged her resilience. And now, she was no longer just fighting for survival. She was fighting for respect, for authority, and for the right to define her own place in a system designed to suppress her. In the shadows, Hayes nursed his bruised ego, realizing that the game had irrevocably changed. For the first time, he faced the reality that Dana Cole was no longer a passive target, no longer someone who could be intimidated at will. Her growth had shifted the balance of power. Dana's eyes scanned the horizon, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the base. She knew this victory was not the end, it was a turning point. The system, Hayes, and others like him would continue to challenge her. But now she had the tools, the training, and the mindset to confront whatever came next. And somewhere deep within her, a quiet, unwavering promise had formed. She would continue to rise, continue to fight, and continue to take control. They had kicked her into the dirt, yes, but she had risen, and there was no force on the base that could push her back down. The next move would be hers. And when it came, no one would underestimate her again. The morning fog clung to Fort Bragg like a shroud, softening the edges of the base but not the tension that had taken root over the past weeks. Dana Cole stood at the edge of the training field, muscles still sore from Hale's grueling drills, but her mind sharper than ever. The past days of humiliation, pain, and relentless SEAL-style training had honed her into a weapon, precise and unyielding. Today, everything would be tested, not just her body but her strategy, her courage, and her resolve. Hayes and his cronies appeared at the far end of the field, their movements cautious, their eyes betraying a mixture of fear and anger. They had watched her rise, seen her dominance grow, and now they approached with hesitation. Dana's pulse quickened, not with fear but anticipation. Every muscle was tense, ready, primed for the confrontation she had been preparing for. Hale stood beside her, silent and observant. His eyes were sharp, assessing, guiding without interfering. Dana had learned from him how to read intent, how to anticipate moves, and how to remain calm under pressure. She drew a deep breath, centering herself, feeling the power of weeks of relentless preparation coursing through her veins. Hayes stepped forward, attempting his usual arrogance, but this time there was no smirk, no bravado, only a flicker of uncertainty. "Lieutenant Cole," he said, voice tight. Dana's gaze met his, steady and unyielding. "I think you know exactly why we're here," she said calmly, letting the weight of her presence speak for her. Hayes faltered, a shadow of doubt crossing his face. He had underestimated her once twice, and now he was beginning to realize the depth of his mistake. The confrontation began with subtle moves, a test of composure, a challenge to authority. Hayes attempted to provoke her verbally, trying to regain control, but Dana remained serene, her tone measured, her body language confident. Every step she took, every gesture she made communicated one undeniable message. She was in command. Hale observed quietly, a slight nod acknowledging her growing dominance. He had trained her to anticipate, to strategize, and now she was applying every lesson. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Hayes and his allies were no longer the aggressors. They were the ones reacting to her strength, her precision, and her control. The situation escalated physically as Hayes tried to shove her, testing her reflexes and confidence. Dana anticipated the move, sidestepping with precision and using his momentum to off-balance him. A quick pivot, a controlled maneuver, and Hayes stumbled, the surprise evident on his face. "You see," Dana said quietly, her voice carrying over the quiet field, "underestimating someone like me has consequences. Today, you are learning that the hard way." The other recruits watched in silence, witnessing a transformation that transcended physical skill. Dana's presence, her strategy, her calm control were as powerful as any weapon. The weeks of relentless SEAL-style training had forged her into someone who could not be intimidated, manipulated, or dismissed. Hayes made one final attempt, lunging in frustration, but Dana was ready. Every strike, every movement was calculated, a combination of strength, agility, and tactical foresight. She neutralized the threat without unnecessary aggression, demonstrating mastery over both the situation and herself. By the time the confrontation ended, Hayes and his cronies had no choice but to step back, their confidence shattered. They realized that Dana was no longer a passive target. She was a commanding force, precise, strategic, and unbreakable. Hale stepped forward, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "This is the result of discipline, focus, and resilience," he said quietly. "You've claimed your space. You've demonstrated that you cannot be underestimated, and you've done it without compromising who you are. That is true strength." Dana exhaled slowly, the tension in her muscles easing, replaced by a sense of triumph she had not felt since the earliest days of her arrival. The humiliation, the shoves, the systemic indifference, all of it had forged her, and now she stood unbroken, undeniable, and respected. The base itself seemed to shift around her. Whispers of admiration replaced hushed doubts. Recruits who had once doubted her skill now gave subtle nods of acknowledgement. Instructors who had dismissed her tenacity now regarded her with respect. The system that had seemed so rigid, so indifferent, had been challenged and reshaped by her perseverance. As the day wore on, Dana walked through the training field, muscles still trembling from exertion but heart steady with resolve. She reflected on the journey, the shove that had sparked the initial fire, the relentless SEAL-style drills that had tested her limits, the ambush that had pushed her to fight strategically, and the final confrontation that had cemented her dominance. Every trial, every setback had contributed to her transformation. She had turned humiliation into strategy, fear into focus, and doubt into undeniable authority. And as she moved through the field, she felt a profound sense of empowerment, not arrogance, not cruelty, but the quiet, unshakable strength of someone who had earned her place through endurance, skill, and intelligence. Hale's voice broke the reflective silence. "Remember this moment," he said. "It's more than just a victory over others. It's proof that resilience, preparation, and focus can overcome any obstacle. You've risen from the dirt they threw you into, and nothing can take that away." Dana looked out across the field, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows over the terrain. She knew the battles weren't over. Hayes might still harbor resentment and the system could still challenge her, but she had fundamentally changed the rules. She had proven her strength, her skill, and her determination. She had risen not only in stature but in spirit. For the first time since arriving at the base, Dana allowed herself a quiet smile. She had been tested, pushed to the limits, and humiliated. She had endured pain, fear, and doubt. But now, standing tall amidst the aftermath of her trials, she realized something crucial. She had not just survived, she had risen. Hayes and the other recruits would remember her, not for the moments they thought had broken her, but for the moments she had reclaimed her dignity, authority, and strength. The SEAL training, the strategic thinking, the sheer perseverance, it had transformed her into someone who could not be undermined or ignored. And Dana Cole knew, with a clarity born of struggle and triumph, that she was ready for whatever came next. They had kicked her into the dirt. They had tried to humiliate her, break her, and dismiss her. But she had risen, and there was no force in the world that could push her back down. The base, the system, Hayes, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the strength she had discovered within herself. What mattered was the resilience she had forged through fire, sweat, and determination. What mattered was that she had transformed adversity into power. And as Dana walked away from the training field, shoulders straight, chin lifted, and eyes forward, she carried with her a lesson that would resonate far beyond the walls of Fort Bragg. No one can define your limits. No one can decide your worth. You rise on your terms or not at all. For Dana Cole, the rise had begun. And this time, she would never fall again.